Gospel according to Mark chapter 8.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus went down with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." Jesus then asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered him, "You're the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about them. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering, and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all of this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan! You are seeing in your mind, setting in your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If anyone wants to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they say in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." The Gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. Have you ever had your heart broken? Maybe you know what it feels like. Maybe it was the day of your daughter or your son's wedding, and you saw them just filled with happiness, and it did something, it touched something inside you, to see them, and to have to see them move on in their lives. Maybe it happened when you were holding the hand of your spouse when they learned the news that it indeed was cancer inside of them. Maybe it was that time when going into your boss's office you thought for sure this was the day you were going to get that raise, only to be told that they were letting you go. Maybe it was that moment when that person you loved was taken from you unexpectedly, and you had to realize that you won't get to see them ever again this side of heaven. It tears us up inside. We feel the pain, and although we speak metaphorically about hearts being broken, the pain we feel emotionally and physically is real. It becomes hard to breathe. We start to shiver. It becomes hard to hear and see straight. That's what happens when our heart breaks. This morning in our gospel reading, we hear a moment when Peter's heart is broken. The story of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, unfolds like a movie. And the scene that we're looking at this morning, it happens just outside the city of Caesarea Philippi. They're on a road, and Jesus turns to his disciples and asks them, "Who do you think I am?" And because we read the Gospel in bits and pieces over the course of a year, it's easy to forget that up until this moment in the Gospel of Mark, no one has ever openly confessed that Jesus is the Messiah. No one has figured it out except for the demons. We know Jesus is, and if you're reading it straight through, the very first you learn that Jesus is the Messiah, because the first words in the first verse is that this is the good news about Jesus Christ, the Son of God, about the Messiah, the Son of God. But like you're watching a movie and you know what's going to happen, but the characters in the movie don't. It begins to unfold right in front of you. And as I'm reading and watching out this scene, as Jesus turns to Peter and says, "Who do you say that I am?" I can feel myself kind of rooting for Peter. Is this the moment? Is he actually going to do it? Is he going to say the words? Is he finally going to get it? And I can feel myself inside cheering, yes, he does, he gets it, he says it. Jesus is the Messiah. And at that moment, the response of Jesus, Peter's heart becomes broken. And it's not when Jesus rebukes him later on. It's that when Jesus immediately after Peter says, "You're the Messiah," Jesus says, "Don't tell anyone." Crack. The first piece breaks off of Peter's heart. And then Peter says, then Jesus says, "I'm going to suffer many things." Crack. Another piece. And then I'm going to be betrayed and handed over. Crack. And then the elders are going to reject him. Crack. Chief priests, the scribes, and then I'm going to be killed. And at that moment, I can almost audibly in my mind hear how Peter's heart is torn asunder. The pain is probably so great inside of him that hearing these words of Jesus, he doesn't even probably register that Jesus says, on the third day I'll rise again. Peter's so taken aback. How could this be? This is not the Messiah that Jesus is describing. The Messiah doesn't do stuff like this. And so he takes Jesus aside, and he actually rebukes Jesus, the person who just confessed was the Messiah. He tells Jesus, no, it ain't going to happen that way. You got to get it straight. You see, Peter has been waiting and longing, just like all of Israel, for a Messiah who's strong, for a Messiah who's going to bring victory, for a Messiah who's going to save them and throw off this oppressive empire that was not allowing them to be the people that God created them to be. That's the Messiah. And that's who they're waiting for. And they had seen Jesus' power. They knew what he was capable of. And they were sure that Jesus was going to do that very thing. They believed in Jesus. And so when Jesus begins to describe what's really going to happen, Peter is torn asunder. His heart is rendered. He cannot believe that the Messiah, the victor, the strength of God would actually allow any of that to actually happen. It is unthinkable. It is blasphemous. It's no wonder Peter wants to rebuke Jesus, because Jesus isn't telling the truth at this moment, because the Messiah just doesn't do stuff like that. And if we're all honest, we have to admit that Peter's definition of the Messiah is very similar to ours. Peter, myself, and just about everyone we ever know, we want a strong God, a God who heals our illnesses, provides ample prosperity, guarantees our security, urges on our military and our sports teams into victory. And a God, and a Messiah, Savior, who generally keeps us happy, healthy, and wise, and protects us from any bad thing that ever happened to us. That's the kind of Savior we want to believe in. And Jesus is going to tell Peter that no, that is not how God registers strength. That's not how God thinks about victory. That is not how God is intended. This isn't the first time Peter's heart is going to be broken. Peter's heart is going to be broken on many other occasions, including that moment when Jesus is in need, on the night when he's betrayed, and Jesus denies him 3 times. Peter's going to realize what a failure he is. What a horrible friend to abandon Jesus at that moment. Peter's heart's going to be broken again when he's sitting on that beach after Jesus is risen from the dead. And Jesus comes and forgives him, restores him. Peter realizes that Jesus is indeed that very Messiah that he so desperately needed. He needed that forgiveness and grace. He needed to experience it. He needed to be reshaped and remolded. And only through forgiveness and grace and experiencing the power of that moment on the beach with Jesus did Peter really, truly understand what it meant to be a Messiah. We all want a Messiah that gives us what we want. We want that Messiah to make our lives happy and successful. That's what we pray for all the time. No illnesses, that new job, that new house, that new whatever. The reality is that kind of God is the God of the 1%, the God of the winners, the God of the victors. And when we think about God in that terms, we have to think also about what about the rest of us? What about the fans of the other 31 teams in the NFL that will not win the Super Bowl? What about the fans or the people who have to walk the hard road of illness, where their bodies are failing, and despite how many times they pray for healing, it doesn't come in the form that they want? What about the people who hear the news that someone they loved just died in a car crash? When we have this image of a Messiah that Peter has, that God always brings victory, the kind of victory we want, the kind of life we want, the kind of prosperity that we long for. we also have to admit that God is only there for 1 or 2% of the people in America. But that's not actually what Jesus offers. Instead, Jesus points to a God who meets us in vulnerability, not in success, meets us in suffering, not in happiness, meets us at the times of loss. Jesus' identity proves elusive precisely because God shows up just when we least expect it. Jesus, it seems, isn't all that interested in defeating the empire, the Roman Empire, or the empire that oppresses or frustrates our lives. At least not in the way that the Jews, or that I would like them to decide to defeat whatever is holding us back. Jesus is perfectly willing to go to his death at the hands of the empire. It is entirely counterintuitive, entirely mad by our own calculations to call that power. And yet that is exactly what Jesus is trying to reveal about God. That the pinnacle of our power is in self-sacrifice. So the question we ask ourselves is, who do you think Jesus is? Who are you willing to confess? Are you willing to say that Jesus is the real Messiah? Not the Messiah that we hope for or that we long for, but the Messiah that we need? So what does it mean to actually follow Jesus? To take up our cross? And how on earth does that lead us to the one thing we all universally and desperately want? Rich and meaningful life. Largely, I think we can only discover that in the act of following who Jesus really is. This is faith at its hardest, because taking up a cross means deliberately, publicly letting go of the path that the empires of this world, advertising, social media, politics, and higher education, and even a lot of religion, letting go of what they prescribe as the good life. Taking up our cross means turning our back on most of the wisdom of the world and picking the scornful way of Jesus, a way that involves dying over and over and over again to ourselves. And the witness of our Christian brothers and sisters throughout history is that this is the path to true life. Not that we save ourselves, but in letting go of our own determination about becoming successful and making something of ourselves, and creating our security and prosperity for our families, and letting go of all of that, and then letting go of the illusion that we can actually accomplish any of that. We surrender ourselves to following God who goes to the cross. We find that we are saved in doing so. That love is actually more powerful than anything else this world fights with. And that sacrificing can lead to joy unspeakable. And that suffering can give birth to meaning. And death can lead us to true life. I was trying to think of some examples of how I saw this play out in people's lives. And if you can give me a moment, I want to give you just 3 stories of people that I've encountered recently. One was a guy who owns a boat. And it's a fancy boat. You know? He loves to go out in Lake Michigan with his family and sail. He had been saving up to get this new, actually I can't even tell you what it is, I don't know what boats, but it's like an instrument thing or another that helps him with his boat. It's going to cost him $3,800. He's been saving it up, and he had done just such a good job at work. They'd given him a bonus, and he's like, yes, I finally get to buy this. I deserve it. I've been working hard, he told himself. The day before he was going to buy it, he was at church, and he heard the story of a young woman who was fleeing from an abusive husband. She had been in a shelter, and she was ready to move out. She had a place to work. She had a place to live. She just needed a car, and she had no way of buying a car so that she could drive to work and get her kids to school in the morning. And so following the way of Jesus, this man decided, I don't need that new instrument thingy on my boat. Instead, I'm going to take this $3,800 and buy this woman a car. I think of the story of Eric, a friend of Lucy's. He was a guy that had he was in full-time Christian ministry. He had this job that just suited him perfectly. He got to go and mentor people and advise churches. And it was a well-paying job that he loved. It involved a lot of speaking at conferences, but he thrived on. And as he was doing this job, he felt alive for God. He was where God wanted him. His gifts were being used. The kingdom of God was being built. But there was trouble at home. His son, who was in first grade, was having these epic meltdowns at school. And they were happening not every day, but on a regular basis. At the end of the first year in school, parents could not understand what was going on until all of a sudden his wife realized these epic meltdowns that resulted in kicking of teachers and throwing of objects, breaking of things, refusal to even to be quiet in classroom. All of these meltdowns happened as he was leaving to go on the road to speak at another conference to use the gifts that God had given him. So his wife and him prayed about it, and they decided that he couldn't do it. So he took what we would refer to as a regular job. His salary was cut in half. He just took a regular office job that didn't use his gifts the way he had always dreamed. But he was home every day for his son. A year went by. And at the end of second grade, he realized that the meltdowns at school had gone away. That their son, who was refusing to even read, and now was flourishing as he developed a love of reading. That's taking up their cross. That is denying yourself. That is living for others. When I think of Dina, a woman who I met when I was on my recent trip to India, she was a college-educated woman. She had finished her degree here in the States. She was back in India, and she had been offered many high-paying jobs, all of which she had turned down, so that she could work in ministry that reached out to women who were victims of slave trafficking. She turned away a career for herself, something that any person would say, you're crazy. You're turning away something that would make you successful, rich, that would help you to become a fuller person. That's what our society would tell her. And she would say, no. The experience of holding the hands of these young teenage women as they were fleeing from suffering, being one of the only people who would ever see them as real human beings, that was making me a person, a real person. That was giving me true life. Taking up our cross so often means turning out what the world says to us means a successful life. What the world says to us we deserve. What the world says to us how we should live. And instead, sacrificing whatever the world is offering us in this life so that we and others can experience true and meaningful life. Amen. Our takeaways for today. The first one is this. Peter's heart breaks in today's reading because he doesn't get the God he wants. It breaks again at the end of the story when he realizes that instead of getting the God he wants, he gets the God he needs. Second takeaway. God employs a different calculus and measure of strength. Not in terms of might, but love. Not by victory, but by vulnerability. Not in possessions, but in sacrifice. Not in glory, but by the cross. And Jesus calls all of us, if we are to follow him, if we are to be his followers, that we lead this kind of life and adopt these kinds of values. Let's stand for our song of the day.